But thank you all for coming. Everybody can hear me okay? Okay, great. Well, you know, the long-awaited fimp project is now underway, and it's exciting, and hopefully after today's session we'll all be a little better informed about what that entails, at least approximate timeline, because not everything is set in stone yet. But I'm very excited for this opportunity, so that, you know, we can meet with and hear from those people who are actually leading the project and who will be interfacing with us in the months and, you know, probably years to come. You know, as you all know, I think pretty much everybody here, if you live in Quogue, you've heard about fimp, and I see a lot of people who've spent a lot of time over the last many years working on this one way or another. The reality is that fimp is here and it's underway. Very, very briefly, and you're going to hear a lot more detail in a minute from the Army Corps of Engineers, it's a federally funded initiative to reinforce approximately 83 miles of the South Shore, beginning at the Fire Island Inlet and heading all the way out to Montauk Point. It covers not only the 83 miles of the South Shore, the ocean front, it also has projects involving 220 miles of the Bay shoreline, the 3 navigation inlets, Fire Island, Moriches, and Shinnecock. And the overall intent is to reduce storm damage while maintaining or enhancing natural resources in our beaches. I know that there are people who have varying views on this, but let's listen to the experts who are about to present to us. So very, very briefly presenting, we have a stellar cast here. We've got Anthony Ciora from the Army Corps of Engineers. He is the senior project manager for all coastal projects. We have Mark Lolka, who's manning the slides, who is the senior project manager for fimp. Also Steve Couch, who's a senior member of the planning team for the Army Corps, and Warren LaRiviere, who's, as I understand correctly, kind of a senior manager for real estate for the Army Corps of Engineers. Also pleased, we have Matthew Chelbus, New York DEC. We have Jay Schneiderman, who will say a few words in a minute, who's, as you all know, Southampton town manager. Just a shout out, he's coming to Quogue on the 10th of September to do a State of the Town on the Village Green. We also have from the town of Southampton, the town attorney's office, Jim Burke and his colleague Sean Cambridge. Kelly Doyle is in the audience. Aaron is here, Tertunian, who doesn't need an introduction to the people in this audience. Our village attorney, Wayne Bruin, is here. I'll stop there. There are many people, our trustees. Anyway, there are 3 main sections, or 2 main sections of the presentation. We're first going to hear a PowerPoint from the Army Corps with an overview of the fimp project with more details than I've briefly provided, and an update on where things stand, kind of an overview of timeline. And then we'll hear from the town attorney's office. As many of you know, if not most, there is an easement process, and they'll provide an overview of kind of the process and steps. And then it's open up for a Q&A. When we get to the Q&A, this is being videotaped, and it will be, a link will be posted on the town website, probably the Army Corps, certainly the village website. So I would ask, when you have your questions, please come up to the mic in the center there, announce yourself, and go ahead and ask your questions. So without further ado, I've handed over to the Army Corps of Engineers. Sorry? Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, I apologize. Jay, would you want to say a few words? I apologize, thank you.
No worries. Thank you, Mayor Truhold. It's nice to see everybody. Thank you for all coming out on this gorgeous summer day, I guess one of the last days of summer. Really important subject matter, and particularly important to the people of Quogue. So fimp is not something that's new to me. I've been working on fimp since, well, 22 years ago when I was East Hampton town supervisor. And I worked on it for my 12 years as a county legislator and my 7 years as a Southampton town supervisor. So this has been an ongoing project, but it's actually goes back even further than that. I'm 60 years old. This project was actually started before I was born, so over 60 years ago. People say government moves slowly. This is like geological time, I think. But, you know, a lot of things have changed in those 60 years. It was certainly understood 60 years ago that erosion was a problem. It's a natural process. I don't know if it's a problem. Everybody understands that. It's a natural process. When you lay the fixed grid of property ownership over the changing contours of the shoreline, you're going to run into issues as the shoreline recedes. And that's the natural process. You know, the beach comes and goes a little bit every day. Sand moves. There's a littoral drift that pushes sand primarily from east to west, from Montauk toward New York. Sometimes the other way. Sometimes it builds back, accretion. Sometimes it recedes a little bit. But there's a trend overall, and it's a natural trend, and it's moving landward. That's a natural process, and as it does, people start to lose their properties, and they want to protect their properties. So erosion was here long before fimp. We know that. But some of the thinking, I think, in the last 60 years has changed. The engineers in the beginning of this looked more toward hardened structures. They looked toward groins or jetties that jutted out perpendicular to the shorelines. They look toward revetments, big rock walls like you see at the lighthouse in Montauk, or bulkheads, the perpendicular structures. But we've also learned through the years that type of solution tends to exacerbate the situation, causing more erosion sometimes, or pushing erosion to other spots. And today the solution is primarily sand. In fact, what's being proposed for Quag is just sand. What's on the beach, just taking it from offshore, from areas that have been studied, and pumping it back onto the shore. Of course, that's expensive. It's very expensive. The fimp project, as it is over $1 billion. It wasn't funded until after Superstorm Sandy. After Superstorm Sandy, the money was put in place, and finally, fimp became a reality. There's a lot of engineering involved, and there are obviously some local contributions that have to be made, though the first instance is almost entirely federal. So this is the right way to approach our shoreline, I believe, this natural way, putting the sand back that gets washed away and buying us a lot more time. So we obviously have challenges with sea level rise and climate change, but this project is really essential. It's really essential, and it's going to require the cooperation of the village as well as the town. We have a great team at the town working on this. We've brought in specialists, consultants. We have to do a lot of work working with property owners, a lot of surveying and assessing the value of the easements that we have to acquire. But we are moving forth diligently. We believe this is an essential project, and we want to see it happen. And I hope that today all of your questions are adequately answered, and that we are partners in this, and we're able to move together and see our beaches rebuilt the way they should be, naturally, with sand. So with that, I will turn it back to you guys. And let me make one other mention. Through the last few years, I've had the pleasure of working with Mayor Sartorius, who's also here. Peter, where I know you're, oh, there you are. So thank you, Peter, for all the work you have done to get us to this point. It's been a tremendous amount of work and learning for all of us. And with that, I thank you. I'm going to stay, and if you need me to answer any questions, I'm happy to do that. Thank you.
Just one additional thing. Thank you so much, Jay, for the overview. There will be opportunities after this meeting and in the coming weeks and months to have individual meetings. The town, everybody is available. Contact information will be shared so that you can ask any specific questions that aren't answered today directly to those who have the answers. I also want to do a shout out to Mark Woolley, who's here from Representative Zeldin's office, and his colleague Nancy. Thank you for being here. And now we will go to the Army Corps. Yeah, I'm going to turn it down.
Good afternoon. Again, my name is Anthony Ciora. I am the Coastal Restoration Program Manager with the New York District Army Corps of Engineers. Most of the past 10 years or so been concentrated on post-Sandy response and recovery efforts, of which this project is a very big part of. It's actually the largest project in our Sandy recovery portfolio. Supervisor mentioned earlier it's well over $1 billion. Actually, it's approximately $1.7 billion when you include all of the non-structural measures that are included along the south shore of Long Island mainland, and assuming, of course, that all of those home elevations are voluntarily participated by the individual homeowners of those structures. But I know the supervisor went through a little bit of the history. I just wanted to go into a little more detail, tell a little about how we got to where we are today. I do want to say that the Army Corps of Engineers, along with New York State DEC, who's our non-federal sponsor, have a long history of working together cooperatively on this very important project. And we're very excited to be here today at a meeting talking about not what we're proposing, what we're recommending, but what we are doing and what we will be doing, because now we have a authorized, approved, and funded project that's actually underway already in some parts of the project area. So we got that approval from the federal government in our own agency in July of 2020. Chief of Engineers report was signed. That report was then used for purposes of congressional authorization. It was submitted to Congress, and it was included in the enacted Water Resources Development Act, or WRDA, of 2020. I do want to mention that this project was authorized not only for the initial construction phase, which is underway with the available funding we received as part of the Sandy Disaster Relief Act, but it also authorized the out-year long-term renourishment phase of the project, where we return periodically to replenish the beaches. I'll go into a little more detail later on that component of the project, which is not yet approved in terms of a project partnership agreement. So yes, we are now officially in the construction phase of the project. I mentioned that the funding that's being used to implement the project is available under the Sandy Disaster Relief Appropriations Act that was enacted way back in 2013. The project is 100% federally funded for the initial construction phase only. The non-federal responsibilities include the acquisition of any necessary real estate needed to construct the project. Those costs are borne by the local partners, the non-federal partners, up front, and then the federal government reimburses the state, the county, and the towns and villages for their real estate costs after the work has been complete, after the real estate's been acquired. There's also long-term operation and maintenance responsibilities that the state has that are non-federal costs, and the state, as Matt, I'm sure we'll talk later, delegates many of those responsibilities down to their local municipal partners via their own separate local cost share agreements. So I mentioned the project partnership agreement. It was officially signed and executed between the Corps and the state last summer in August, and then the state executed sub-agreements, 6 of them in total, with the county and the 5 towns that are included in the project area. That's Babylon, Islip, Brookhaven, Southampton, and East Hampton. So the current PPA, as I mentioned earlier, includes the initial construction phase only of the Fire Island to Montauk Point project. That's the approximate $1.7 billion cost I mentioned earlier. That long-term renourishment phase, which is approximately 30 years, that's now authorized, is not included under that current project partnership agreement. Reason why we separated them out has mostly to do with the fact that the cost sharing is 100% federal for the initial phase where funds are available. The cost share for the renourishment phase will be 50% federal and 50% non-federal, and those non-federal costs are split between the state and their local partners. Also, from the federal side, the renourishment phase will require future federal appropriations that will have to go through the normal federal budget process, which is an annual, year-to-year budget development process that we will undertake when the time and need arises in the future. So we are under construction. We awarded our first construction contract last August, shortly after the project partnership agreement was executed. That first contract is to the west. It was the dredging of Fire Island Inlet and placement of sand in the town of Babylon, as well as at Robert Moses State Park. That contract continues to be underway. We're hoping to finish that up this coming fall and winter. And we have subsequent contracts, which I'll get into later, which are to be awarded soon. Mark, the next slide. So this is just an overview of the project area, 83 miles stretch from Fire Island Inlet out to Montauk Point. Does not mean that every foot and mile of beach are included in this project, or every home is being elevated. There are select areas that are part of the project. It's mostly areas that we consider to be most vulnerable to coastal storm damage. There's two major components to the project. You have the Atlantic shoreline features, which is more the traditional beach and dune construction that's meant to primarily to prevent or minimize the likelihood of breaching of the barrier system. And then you have the non-structural or mostly home elevation component of the project in those South Shore communities on the Long Island mainland. Next slide. This just gets a little bit more into detail on the type of features that are included in the project. I mentioned already the first contract at Fire Island. We have subsequent contracts that will include dredging of Mauritius and Shinnecock inlets and the placement of that material on the downdrift beaches to the west, as well as on the bay side of the Barrier Island at what we call coastal process features, coastal process features, or CPFs, which is basically bayside marsh restoration activities for those areas. The contract that will include the village of Quogue is the dredging of the offshore borough sites and the sand placement. As you can see, that's the third bullet up there. That's what we call Contract 3. It says Tiana, but it's not just Tiana, of course. It's Southampton beaches, as well as beaches in the town of East Hampton in the area around downtown Montauk. Next slide, please. This is just a map visualizing the different contracts and where they're located. We do envision at this time a total of 11 separate contracts making up the entire project. Those 11 contracts include 5 non-structural contracts for the home elevations and the floodproofing. That's subject to change. That's just for planning purposes at this time. A lot will go into determining the non-structural sequencing. Obviously, it's such a large program. We have over 4,000 homes that are eligible for the home elevations, and we're going to be looking at the community-based type contract acquisitions. It would be too onerous, obviously, to look at it house to house or block to block. But more to follow on the non-structural as we continue through the design phase for that component of the project. So just near term, what we're looking at, Contract 2, which is the dredging of Mauritius and Shinnecock inlets and the placement of sand on those downdrift beaches and the coastal process feature sites on the bay side of the Barrier Island. We're looking to award that contract next month. We actually have a bid opening scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, so we are excited and anxiously awaiting the outcome of the results of the bids that we receive from contractors, and if acceptable, we look to proceed forward with the award of that contract sometime next month, with a construction start anticipated for the late fall of this year. Contract 3, which is the contract that includes your community, currently scheduled for award next fall. We'll get into more details during our discussion and Q&A session, but really the driver for the Contract 3 schedule will be the real estate acquisitions that are necessary for us to proceed with the advertisement and the award of the construction contract. At this point, the plans and specs are past 90% complete. The design is past 90% complete, so we should have no issues working through to the final package for the design, obtain the necessary permit from the state. It is the real estate, again, that's going to be on the critical path for us to make that schedule in the fall of next year. Next slide. This just gives a little more detail on the non-structural, and the reason why I add a separate slide on this is because from our experience in coordinating with our local partners and the residents in those communities, we get most questions coming on the non-structural in terms of what does it mean for them, is their home eligible and included, what will the federal government pay for. So this is just giving a little more detail. I mentioned over 4,000 structures within the 10%, the 10-year floodplain have been identified throughout the stretch of the project from Babylon out to East Hampton. We'll be elevating structures, flood-proofing some, acquiring 14 of them, actual acquisition of 14 homes that are necessary to build one of those or two of those coastal process feature sites in Mastic Beach. And then we have ring walls. It's more of a structural measure, but the Corps considers a ring wall as part of our non-structural program. This can get confusing. When there is a larger structure, or say a commercial structure, a business that is just not feasible to elevate. So we actually put a barrier or a protective wall in front of it and include that as part of our non-structural measures. And this part of the process, we haven't started construction yet. We're still working through the design. We're going to be, we have identified pilot communities that we're going to be looking at for approximately 25 to 50 homes that we will use as a basis for the entire program moving forward. This is a very ambitious and large-scale effort on the part of the Corps of Engineers and the state of New York. We're going to be incorporating some lessons learned from similar programs that may have been led by others, whether it be New York Rising by the state or Build It Back by the city of New York, FEMA-type programs, incorporating lessons learned and after-action reviews that we hope will facilitate and improve the process moving forward. We understand that there will need to be an extensive public outreach and communications plan set up, and all of those details are currently being worked or will be worked in concert with our state partner and the county and the towns as well as the villages, starting with that pilot program. And we're hoping to start that process this coming fall. But realistically, I don't think we'll start actually elevating homes until the year 2024. That's where it's looking. I mean, we're already approaching the end of 2022, so that's not really that far off. But again, because of all the advanced planning and communications and outreach that's needed for working literally inside one's home, as you can imagine, This part of the project will start a little later than the ongoing Atlantic shorefront features. Next slide. Okay, so that's just a summary of the project. We'll be happy to answer any other questions you may have on the overall project itself during the Q&A session. I know we're going to get into a lot more details on the easements requirements and the real estate acquisitions, but if there's any questions, technical questions, questions on schedule, upcoming work, and et cetera, certainly be prepared to answer those. And with that,
yeah, why don't we pass on? We'll save the questions to the end of the presentations. Yep. This will be available on the website.
Absolutely. We will post this presentation on our website, Mark. That's probably the easiest way to do it.
By tomorrow.
I said we'll have it there tomorrow.
Great. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I am Assistant Town Attorney Sean Cambridge, here representing the Town Attorney's Office today. I'd like you all to consider this a pre-informational stage. We are at the very, very beginning. I'm going to give out lots of contact information today. We want to be your partner in this. We want to engage with everybody here and have an open dialogue as we move forward.
Speak into the mic.
Sure, of course.
Is it on? No, the lights. Oh, the lights. Sorry.
Technical issues. So we will be having likely a town work session on the same subject matter as well as a series of public hearings. If you feel that you don't have a question answered today, please submit those questions in writing if possible. You will have a second bite at the apple. So if you miss asking your question today, you have plenty of opportunities. This is the very, very first stage here. As the old adage goes, we're about to tell you what we're going to tell you. So I'd like to start off and thank the Army Corps for bringing this project. This will add quite a bit of sand to the beaches for residents to enjoy and protect and mitigate those impacts of flooding from barrier breaches. In addition, I'd like to thank the Army Corps for placing 800,000 cubic yards of sand near the Ponquag Beach, saving that beach pretty recently. The town does appreciate that effort. I'm going to go through a brief outline of our role in this. The town, as you know, is responsible for obtaining required easements in order for the Army Corps to complete this project. Our first step is going to be outreach. Over the next few months, everybody here or your authorized representative, whichever you prefer, will be contacted by the town attorney, James Burke, assistant town attorney, Kelly Doyle, or myself. Again, we'd like to have a dialogue with you. We can discuss specific options and concerns to each of your properties. I see lots of people have notepads and pens. Feel free to call us, all right? Our number is going to be 631-287-3065. We're all available and eager to speak to you about this. We also have our team of consultants here today. We have Gil Anderson, former commissioner of the Suffolk County Department of Public Works. His role is he's going to coordinate with surveyors and engineers and make sure all these surveys are right. He's got lots of experience. He knows what he's doing here, and he's our expert. We have Len Marchese, our former Southampton Town Comptroller. He's had proven success with many municipalities. He's going to oversee the budget for this project and make sure that we're on track. And we have Aram Tertunian of First Coastal here in West Hampton Beach. He's a renowned geologist. Many of you know him already. He's been involved in many of the shoreline restoration projects within the town and within other municipalities. So the town will be contacting you. This team of experts may be contacting you, and the town attorney's office will certainly be contacting you. We're going to ask for your cooperation and access to your properties in some instances. We like to have our consultant surveyors prepare surveys that are accurate and reflect everything on your property, as well as depict the proposed easement area. Once those surveys are completed, we will go to the appraisal step, where someone will determine what these easements are worth. And the town will make offers after the Army Corps reviews those appraisals based on the appraisals. All right, so relatively straightforward. I know it's not a lot of information for right now, but we will take questions during the Q&A portion. We have all of our experts here available. We have Assistant Town Attorney Kelly Doyle and Town Attorney James Burke, as well as myself. Again, I just want to give you that contact information. It's going to be 631-287-3065. In addition, all of our emails are posted on our Southampton Town website, southamptontowny.gov. Feel free to put any questions in writing. I always encourage that. If somebody else did not think of your question, it preserves it as this process moves along. And like I said, this will be over the next several months. So if you didn't think of something today, you have plenty of time to get in touch with us and express your questions or concerns. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much to the Army Corps, to the town for being here and for giving this overview. Now, an opportunity for people to ask their questions. Just before doing that, did you want to add anything for the DEC or formally, or just answer questions?
Yeah, we can answer questions. I think Anthony covered anything. Is there anything specific for the state?
Well, I'll tee it up, and please don't be shy. I'm sure many people will ask. But one question that I know many residents here have is about this easement. Why is an easement needed? My understanding is that there already is effectively an easement to access the beaches, at least in the town of Southampton. So I guess if you could just explain a little bit more the rationale for why this easement process is necessary, I think that would help people understand. We're not asking people to provide unfettered access across their personal property. It's really on the beach. So if that I think would answer some people's general question in the first place. Who's that to?
I'll do my best. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Matt Chelbis, New York State DEC. Anywhere the Army Corps places sand, they require perpetual easement, both for ongoing maintenance of the project and to allow public access. So the Army Corps requires a non-federal sponsor for all these projects. In this case, it's the New York State DEC, and that responsibility to obtain those easements falls to us. In turn, New York State DEC for coastal projects is required to have local sponsors. As Anthony said, we have a total of 6 local sponsors for this project, each of the 5 towns along the South Shore, along with Suffolk County. So we have agreements, just that more or less mirror the agreements that we have with the Army Corps of Engineers that require the local municipalities, in this case the 5 towns of the counties, to obtain those easements. And maybe I'll turn it over to Anthony or Warren about more details about the easements.
Yeah, just, as far as there being an existing easement, every easement should be specific to the type of right that's being granted. An easement's just a proper...
Speaking louder than that.
All right. Is that better there? All right. Hold it close. So to the point of there's already an existing easement to allow access to these beaches, I'd say that you've got to have, for an easement, it's got to be specific to a specific right that's being granted. So there's no specific right under the existing, easement in the patent, I guess, to allow for a sand to be placed there in a certain shape and form for us to come and go for survey purposes throughout the years to ensure that it's not being eroded, for the state to operate and maintain it, for us to do renourishment in the future. So all these things are captured in this in an easement with the state and the landowners that would facilitate that.
But again, the easement is on the beach, not on the. It's to put sand on the beach.
Correct. It's linear along the coast, essentially where the shoreline already is.
Opening it up to questions, please. Yes, please come to the microphone if you would and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sally Beatty. I'm a park trustee, but I'm going to talk resident first.
top there's a button.
There we go. Hi. I'm Sally Beatty. I'm a Quogue resident, but I'm also a Quogue trustee. I just want to put that out there. On the easement question, what the mayor teed up, I just want to I think it would be helpful to provide a little bit more detail. So access to the beach to place sand there, I get that, but I envision, when I hear a surveyor, I envision people with cameras and scopes walking around, if I'm a beach owner, if I have property on Dune Road, walking around my property, walking through my backyard, coming up my driveway, coming and going to do these surveys. Is that part of what is expected?
Great. So the town attorney's office will be reaching out to everybody. So you won't have surveyors walking around on your property. We're going to reach out and ask for your permission. So everything will be coordinated. You won't have random people walking around. We're going to reach out to each of you personally. So that concern will be addressed.
I'm not sure if Gil Anderson, who's been through this with the county, may have some information on what the survey is, how much are they going to be involved with the specific properties. I think primarily they'll be using the aerials, so they'll be as least invasive as possible as far as impacting anybody coming to the properties. But the important thing is to have a relationship between what the easement's going to be to the property existing now, what impact, because we have to get as an accurate as possible impact of the, if any, of the easement to the property itself. So that's what we have to kind of survey, so we have to make sure that what we know what's on the property is, in relation to the placement of the easement on the particular properties.
So, Jim, to follow up on that, there's going to be two surveys, right? There's going to be a survey during acquisition that's going to be needed. That's going to be needed for the appraiser to do their work. It's going to get attached to the easement. It's going to get recorded. That's one survey. But then over the life of the project, along the beach, within the easement, there would be surveys done of what's the beach profile looking like. You know, is it getting swept away at a certain point? You know, it's going to be identified that over-nourishment is needed. So for that first survey, there would be surveyors on your property that have got established property corners. I'll defer to Gil on what's involved. So.
But for that second survey over the life of the project, the work would be limited to the easement. You would not have surveyors walking around your property over the life of the project. It would just be limited to the shorefront. The shorefront.
Correct. There would be the surveyors would need to access the property to do complete the initial survey, locate property line corners, essentially do a full survey of the property, and then in the future, as Steve mentioned, it would only be along the beach where the work is being done, where the beach has been established as well as the dune.
Yeah, you're on. It's on. Just speak loudly.
Okay, I did. I've got a couple of questions. First, just Steve's question, description about the ring walling as compared to elevating properties. And I think what you said was for commercial properties, and I'm just curious how the Army Corps will decide which properties qualify to be elevated versus which ones will be ring walled, and if that has to do with the size of the property or the use.
Oh, thanks. So the non-structural that Anthony was talking about is all on the bayside shorelines, and it's really based upon the structure type. So just to be clear, along the barrier island, there is no home elevation or ring walls.
Okay, thanks.
It's really intended to address the flooding on the bayside communities. And really what we've done is we've done analysis of each structure type to see if the structure is physically able to be elevated. But if you think of something like a large brick warehouse or a commercial establishment, those may not be able to be elevated. And in that instance, it would be a wall that is around, just immediately around the perimeter of that structure to protect it.
Great. That's
And I,
interesting.
and I should say that, you know, over 90% of the structures that we're talking about are being elevated. So it's a very small number of structures that would have a ring wall around them.
And is there somewhere to tell from the presentation that is available online now which properties have been identified?
Yes.
Okay, because there's a map now and it's just hard to read.
Yeah. I'm not sure there's any properties in Quogue. I think this is talking about the overall 220 miles of bayshore. So I don't think this is something that directly
Okay.
concerns us.
Great. In that case, that's it. Thanks very much.
Good morning. My name's Kevin McAllister. I'm founder and president of Defend H2O. We are Sag Harbor-based clean water and coastal advocacy organization. I want to thank the Corps, the mayor of Corus Village, and the Southampton town for bringing this information forward. I want to stress as a preamble, I think it's extremely important that this information with reoccurring opportunities to bring this out to the community, because there's a lot of unknown on the technical aspects and certainly the financial aspects that are down the road, the second iteration. I want to focus my comments on sand management. I've been certainly reviewing and participating in the fimp process probably the last 5, 6, 7 years. I certainly have spoken to sand bypassing as a need. I thought it's largely been deficient on Long Island with respect to our downdrift beaches. My question is, as I understand it, I believe the ebb shoal is on a 4-year cycle. The navigable channel, I believe, is every 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. And my inquiry is, have we explored actually going into the flood delta, what is known as Warner Island? It has, I would argue as a biologist, minimal habitat value, at least over the long term. It is seasonality to it. I believe there's a major source of beach-compatible sediments. I believe FIMP plan indicated that it was incompatible. Certainly for the coastal process features on the backside, which is generally finer sediments, it may be suitable. This would kill 2 birds with 1 stone, a mother load of sand for the eroding commercial dock area known as the bowl, which constantly needs attention, as well as potential water quality improvements to the back bay with flushing. This is something the town embarked on a couple years ago. This element was never explored. So again, this is a natural feature. It is a flood delta through coastal processes. I would argue we need to recover that material. So I would appreciate response to that, and I guess for subsequent questions, I will put them in writing. And in particular, the second, third iteration of FIMP, as you pointed out, the Army Corps certainly will not cover the 100%. There becomes the cost share. How is that allocation realized down into the community, say from oceanfront property owners to those that may live, you know, a mile from the nearest bridge? Thank you very much.
I can address this. And Kevin was referring to the map that we had up before, which does relate to Contract 2, which, as Anthony mentioned, is getting ready to be awarded, which includes the dredging of Shinnecock Inlet, Moriches Inlet, and placing that sand on the downdrift shorelines. You know, the dredge locations are generally shown as the circles, and the blue lines are the placement locations. And as Kevin mentioned, this is, and actually even the supervisor mentioned this as well too, is that this is a departure from what we've done in the past, where in the past we dredge the inlets and we place that sand on the downdrift shoreline. But we do recognize that these inlets are a barrier to the transport of sand. So they serve as a sediment deficit. And what's important to the village of Quogue here is that over the long term, as we dredge these inlets and bypass sand, it maintains that literal transport and reduces, you know, the erosion in this area. So what the FIMP project is recommending is dredging an additional amount of sand over what is normally done for navigation in order to, so that these inlets are not acting as a sediment sink. And so as part of the FIMP project, we laid out a plan for how would you do this over a 50-year cycle. And as Kevin mentioned, we have to dredge these inlets periodically for navigation. So the recommendation was, if we're going to dredge it for navigation anyhow, let's match up the same dredging cycles for this bypassing of sand. And it does vary by inlets. But generally, as we were looking at this over a 50-year life, our initial approach was that the sand that accumulates on the ebb shoal, on the ocean side, is more dynamic. It's more self-replenishing. There's a larger volume of sand that ends up in the ebb shoal as compared to the flood shoal. So the focus was really, how do we take that material off of the ebb shoal over the long term so that we're not putting these inlets into a state of disequilibrium or chaos, whatever the right word is. But I will acknowledge that when we put together this FIMP project, and particularly as it relates to the inlets, we acknowledge that we don't know all of the answers. So a key thing that has been built into this project is a monitoring and adaptive management component, and with the inlets specifically, where we've acknowledged that we need to relook at how often are we doing it, how much are we doing it, and where are we getting the sand from, and where is that being placed. And I mean, and to further Kevin's point, we're starting to take a hard look at the flood shoals now, because both at Moriches, where we're seeing issues related to Cupsog, County Park, as well as Shinnecock, we are seeing that the ebb shoals are starting to encroach, push further south, and causing issues on the bay shoreline of the barrier island. So the FIMP project has built in opportunities for adjusting that. Part of the concern was that you can't take that sand off the flood shoal every 2 years or every 4 years. It's not a sustainable process, but it is something that could be looked at, certainly as we move forward.
Please, Lynn, go ahead.
My name is Lynn Joyce. Oh, sorry. I live on Dune Road, where I've lived most of my life, in Quogue. My question is, you have been speaking about the easement and going on property. Presently, I believe, the sand in front of our property up to the dune, the high water line, is public. And then the dunes are owned by the owners of the property. So the easement applies to the dunes now, which we evidently are expected to sign for the government to take over, basically, to do the sand replenishment. I really wonder about the value of our properties once the government has a right to use our dunes as they please, basically, and what the implications of that will be in the future. It's in perpetuity, I believe, so it will be ongoing forever. And I just would love to have an explanation of what that actually means, the easement and the ownership.
Right, and it is only to place the sand, obviously, but the value of that is the question. That'll come out during the appraisal process. That's exactly what the role essentially is of the town. We have to do our surveys, compare the easement to every particular property, how that easement will affect that particular property. So each individual property landowner will have their own appraisal, and they'll have a determination of the impact of that easement on your particular property. So that's something that will be fleshed out say in the coming months. It'll only be started, say within the next couple of months, and then when exactly you'll be receiving an offer from the town, that's kind of yet to be determined. But I would say no sooner than say at least 6 months from now. But that what you're saying is exactly what that'll be the job of the individual appraisers, who are outside consultants. They're not town employees, who have to make that determination. And then you have obviously you'll have your ability, you'll have the outright to look at that have any questions, dispute it, or you know,
Right.
from that point on.
'Cause I also know that obviously there are properties that are literally leaning over the dune, and they are in jeopardy of all the storms, and they've been affected. So in that case, if in fact the dune, or what is left of those dunes, is turned over to the government, how does that affect that property that is literally sitting on top of the dunes?
Hopefully very positive.
Yeah,
I mean, are you going to have to infringe upon the property that is already on top of the dune? Because we're talking, I presume, about the dunes and about the renourishment, which is where that sand is going to be pushed up.
Right.
But some of these houses, there's no way, unless you're going to plan on moving, you know, substantially closer to the ocean, but we're not stopping the ocean.
Right.
In my case, fortunately, my house is set quite far back,
Right.
and it is elevated.
Sure.
But, so it's, you know, no, I'm, thank you God, to this point, not as in jeopardy as many of the houses in Quogue that have hard structures put in, literal walls of hard structures have been put up in front of their homes, which obviously have affected the other properties that are to the east or the west, and to the detriment of those properties.
Right. Absolutely.
So, thank you.
So, one thing just to clarify, there's not going to be any homes that are going to be impacted. No one is going to be asked to relocate from their homes. I'm not going to acquire homes and demolish them or anything like that. So, can't hear.
I was just going to expand upon what Warren was saying. Is when we do our beach fill design, we do look at you know, where are the houses, and in this instance we came up with an alignment that does fall, you know, seaward of the homes. So that in the village of Quogue, as we're implementing this beach fill, there is no requirement to provide an easement that falls, you know, underneath or, you know, within the footprint of any existing structure. Everything is seaward of the existing homes. I think there might be some instances where, you know, dune crossing structures, you know, would fall within the footprint of the dune, but essentially that's the only man-made structures that fall within the easement area.
Mr. Mayor, my name is Aram Turchunian with First Coastal. If I just might offer some more basic information to the group. The situation about the easement is simply because property owners under their deed own to the mean high water line of the Atlantic Ocean. So from the mean high water line to Dune Road is private land. Now there is a public access easement, but there isn't the easement to place sand as has already been described. It's also important to understand what is that particular geography. So if you think about it, if you're standing at the water and you turn around and you start walking up the beach, when you get to the dune, that's the end of the easement. And an easement is not the acquisition of all of the property. It is only the right to exercise those things that are specifically described in the easement, which in this case is to place sand, to measure the sand, and then come back and do that again. So the geography is from the mean high water line to the dune line. That's it. And the activity is the placement of sand, the measurement of the sand, and the repeat of the same. So I think that, you know, basic information, I think, might help some people more clearly understand what's being asked of them.
Good morning. I live on Dune Road. I'm wondering, can you hear me? Oh, that's better. My understanding is that this sand is going to be placed on the east end of Quogue Beach and not the entire length. I don't know if that's correct, but I'm wondering where the borough site is exactly, how far out the dredges will be, and who will monitor the distance that those dredges will operate from.
You had a few questions in there, and the first one was the location of where the beach fill is actually occurring. And you are correct. What we've done is we've done a survey of the beach already to characterize the height and width of the dune and the height and width of the beach. And essentially, if what we're doing is we'll be constructing to a certain dimension. And so when we go out to construction, if the beach dimensions already exceed what our design is, we wouldn't be going in and doing work. So it is correct that there's a subset of the village of Quogue that does require construction. Now that being said, the plan does include what we are planning for is renourishment in the future, so that if conditions change even between now and when we go to construction, in a year from now or sometime over the 50-year life of the project, if there is a need for renourishment, that work could be done. So that's part of the reason why we are acquiring the real estate for the entire area, so we have the ability to do that if things change and in the future if there's a need for renourishment.
Well, on that, we acquire what's needed for the contract, for the construction contract. So if your property's not been identified, as Steve mentioned, that it's already got enough sand, you would not be approached at this time for an easement. But in the near future, you would be contacted to provide that easement. That's what we consider the proactive breach response. So that for the length of the project, there would be an easement on every property. So that while your beach may look good now, 20 years from now, it may not look so good, and we need to have the ability to come in and do that work.
Just my understanding is that there are currently 41 properties that are subject to the current contract 3, plus the two village properties. So that's the number of properties that are currently subject. There are maps in the back. It'll be available, Rob. That information is, and as I understand it, just echoing what Warren said, is that this is subject to possible fine-tuning because the maps were drawn last year based upon aerial and site visits at that time. So it was updated in 21, and now we're 22. We're beginning the process. It looks like it won't begin until the end of 23 or beginning of 24. So my understanding is that there will be some flexibility when you finally go to contract, if the beach condition has changed in the ensuing 2 years.
So as of our 100% design, that's what's been sent to the state. We would provide them a shape file also to hand down to the surveyors so that they can work from the right area, and then the survey would tie it down. Once that survey is done, that is what we're acquiring as an easement, or the state, or the town's acquiring as an easement, and there would be no flexibility from that point forward. It would be only within that easement. What I was mentioning is for those 41, if there are additional properties in the village of Quogue that are not identified, to have what we call initial construction, but there are other properties within the village of Quogue that we identify as proactive breach response, the state would receive an additional notice to proceed, not attached to a specific contract, for the length of the project to go out and acquire. So that would be like a second wave of acquisition, but it's not directly tied to any initial construction contract.
I believe you had 2 other questions, but
Yes.
one of them had to do with the source of the sand.
Yes, where the borough site is in the Quogue area.
Yeah, the borough site will be approximately 1.5 to 2 miles offshore. It's a site that's been identified that has suitable beach fill quality material that's compatible with the sand that's historically been on the beach. And secondly, who will monitor the contractor and its operations? That will be the Army Corps of Engineers. We do have on-site inspectors that are required to provide what we call quality assurance over the contractor's work, and they will be overseeing construction. And I think you might have said, where will the dredge be hooked up? Usually, we envision this contract 3 up here, as we call it, dredging from offshore borough areas and sand placement. It will be what we call a hopper dredge type, which is where the vessel is out in the borough site offshore, basically sucks up the sand, mixes it with water to create a slurry mix, carries it in its hopper or its bin, and then connects to a pump out that's usually several hundred yards offshore, and that pump out is connected to submerged pipeline under the water that then connects to shore pipe on the beach. And then you'll see that operation. I don't know if you've had a chance to witness it before. So that's basically what the setup will look like. And again, it will be Army Corps of Engineers inspectors that will be on site overseeing the contractor's operation and work.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, one thing I just want to add, besides the dredge, there will also be on-land equipment, bulldozers and the like that will shape the beach to create the desired profile during construction.
Hello, my name is Carol Moselle. I live in the village, not on the beach. And I was just wondering, I've heard that once the beach has been replenished, that the village beach will have to be open to the public. Is that true or not?
Yes and no, in the sense that yes, there is a requirement that there will be more public access provided as a condition of receiving federally funded sand, and that is Peter, my predecessor, had discussions with the town on this point. There will be limited access because our village beach is small and our parking facility is limited. There's an additional lot to the east of the village beach parking lot that is co-owned by the village and the town of Southampton. That was part of the acquisition when we bought the Snail House and all, going back several years. So what has been agreed is that we will provide daily parking passes to be charged a fee for up to 30 town residents. Those that will be provided parking in that extra area. We will have to prepare that area, probably pave it or clear it, but it will be limited in nature. It's not unfettered access to the world, but it will be providing up to 30 parking places to town of Southampton residents.
Okay.
Peter, I'm sorry, please. Oh, it's not town? Okay, John. Okay, I'm sorry. Thanks for the clarification. It's not just limited to town residents. It's to the general public, but it's a limited number.
And they won't be able to just walk come in a bus and just let people off to walk onto the beach?
No. Well, there's going to be a limit to what we can do to control it, but yes, we will still have our guard at the beach, and so I think that while I appreciate the concern, I don't think there's a risk that we're going to end up turning into Jones Beach, if that's the concern.
Right.
Well, it's a question of property values,
Sure, understood.
But there are federal, you hit it on the head earlier, that there are requirements for public access when you have a federally funded project. So I guess my question would be, what would be the village's policy for drop-offs where folks are being dropped off without parking?
We'll have to cross that bridge when we get there, sir. This is a new issue which we haven't fully designed.
That's an issue that will have to come up for further discussion.
We understand.
Yeah.
And did I understand that every property in Quogue will be surveyed, or just the beach?
Just the beach.
Just the beach. Okay, thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you for all the work you're doing. My name is Connie Jones. I grew up at 115, 117 Dune Road, and recently sold 115 Dune Road. When the property was being surveyed, the surveyor yelled to me and had me come out and said, "Ma'am, do you realize you're paying taxes on property that is 25 feet underwater?" It was low tide at that point, so it was about 18 inches underwater. At high tide, it would be higher. It does not have a bulkhead, and growing up, the canal was dredged twice a summer. The surveyor also commented that when the inlet is not constantly, you're saying it's twice a year, dredged, it allows more water to come in, which means more water comes into the canal, which means the water spreads out, which means it affects property values because you lose your land. Can you address what they're doing regarding the extra water that's coming into the canal and spreading out?
this is a tough one, but I guess what you're it sounds like you're on the bay side of the barrier island,
Yes, canal side.
and that certainly a lot of these properties are defined as going down to the I guess a fixed boundary, and it's not set as a mean high water. I think that's what you're saying, and that is essentially as that tide level changes. It can change for multiple reasons. Whether it's the dredging of the inlet can have an influence on the tide rate. We've also experienced sea level rise, which is also raising that mean high water line. But essentially, I think that's a situation that a number of people encounter if you have those fixed boundaries, but the tide is coming in. That it is that land that is underwater. How that's dealt with on the taxes, I guess I would. I would defer that to the local municipality.
Why not dredge the canal and make it deeper the way it was when I was a little girl? So that the water coming in doesn't spread out.
Yeah, and that's part of the challenge is if you think of it, if you dredge the canal, you still have the height of the water that's defined by what's happening on the ocean. So often the height of the water in the bay it's not a volume consideration, it's a height consideration. So if you dredge out the canal, it's really not going to impact the height of the water, because if you almost think of it, you have an infinite supply of water from the ocean that's driving that height in the bay.
But according to the surveyor, it's because you're dredging the inlet that's making more water come in, that's creating more water in the canal and the height.
That could be part of the contribution, but like I said, there's a number of things. Even if you get a storm that's blowing water across the bay, that localized setup. There's a number of contributors to that water elevation in the bay.
All right. Well, it's a serious consideration to the property values on the canal side of what's happening. All right. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Susan Boyle, and I have a house on Dune Road. I am curious about the borrow sites and the process of the replenishing of the sand and what's being done to minimize the disruption and effect on the marine biology, the ecosystem of the ocean.
So as part of our report that was completed in 2000, we did do an environmental impact statement, and as part of that, we did a number of studies to identify the borrow areas, and part of that work is looking not only is the sand compatible with what's on the beach, but also what is the impact associated with dredging that sand. I will say from the physical perspective, part of the reason these borrow areas are so far offshore is we do want to make sure that when we dredge these borrow areas, it's not impacting the erosion of what's happening on the shoreline behind it. So we've done engineering modeling to show that dredging the sand does not impact the wave climate. And generally the dredging that we're talking about is taking 5 to 10 feet of sand from the borrow area. From the biological side and also from a cultural resources side, we've done surveys to make sure there's no shipwrecks or artifacts, and that we understand what the organisms are that live in the sand and the fish that use the area above the borrow area. And what we've done this for a number of different projects, and we have an extensive study in New Jersey and also some other areas in Long Island that have ground truth which generally show that the organisms that live within that sand are well acclimated to coming back quickly. So often the organisms that live there tend to come back on the order of 6 months to 12 months, maybe 18 months. So what we have shown is that when you're dredging these borrow areas, there's a long-term change in the elevation, the topography, but the organisms that live within the sand often recover very, very quickly and return back to normal. Like I said, but on our webpage, if this is something you're interested in, we have extensive reports that document the work that has been done to study this.
Okay, and just related to that, in terms of on the shoreline, the effects of bulldozers on like the piping plover and other
species?
No,
and that's a good question. Part of what we've agreed to, again, through the whole process of arriving at this project, that the construction does happen outside of the piping plover season. So we are observing the time of year restrictions, where all work would be done before the 1st of April when the piping plover arrive. And we also have included an extensive monitoring program as well, so that we understand if there are effects or consequences, what that is. You know, the birds do eat the critters that live in the beach, and that is an effect. And then I think Anthony mentioned these coastal process features. The fimp project does include measures along the bayside shoreline, which in a lot of instances are also intended to help provide piping plover habitat and provide habitat to other bird species.
I may have glossed over it during my overview presentation for the sake of timeliness, but you know, Steve's absolutely right. The report that was completed in 2020 included many appendices, and among them was the federal environmental impact statement that included all the environmental studies, as well as a biological opinion that was coordinated with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for the protection of endangered species. So we actually, as part of this project, it was a little unique in that because of the Fire Island National Seashore that's located to your west here, we had to come up with what we call the mutually agreeable plan with the United States Department of Interior, because the Park Service owns that land and we have endangered species. And the two secretaries, the Secretary of the Interior and the Secretary of the Army, had to sign off and approve the plan before July 2020 when that Chief of Engineers report was signed. So we are very confident in the work we did to ensure that the environmental impacts for this project are minimized, and I'm sure the Department of Interior would agree as well, due that they signed off and approved it. Those are good questions, though. Thank you.
Thank you for all the work that you've undertaken for this project. I just want to ask, my name is Karen Cirencioni. I live on Dune Road on the ocean, and I want to ask, what's your understanding? Mr. Schneiderman had indicated that there is erosion due to hardened structures on the beach. That's proven, such as groins and revetments. And what is your understanding of the erosion due to the geotextiles that are on the beach? Because they're also under the category of hardened structures.
Well, and I think the impact of the structures, it varies, depending upon the type of the structure. So, in this area, I mean, one that's clearly been demonstrated is that Shinnecock Inlet is contributing to the erosion of the downdrift shore. That's a given. And everyone knows Shinnecock Inlet, and you know what that looks like as far as the interaction with the water. On the flip side, there's actually the West Hampton, the groin field that was constructed as part of the fimp project in the 1960s, which we actually see is resulting in accretion to the east, and actually generating some of that stability. When it comes to the individual homeowner properties, I think what you have to look at is what is the interaction with of that structure with the water on a daily basis. If you do have a structure that's built well above the high tide line, where there's not regular interaction of the water, you would expect that any impact associated with that would be relatively small. I mean, I think the challenge that the supervisor highlighted is over time things change, yes. and so those. What may be less of an effect now could have a greater effect in the future if the shoreline does erode. But I'm sorry, it's more of a general answer. It's hard to say because each structure can be somewhat specific or unique.
Well, my understanding in reading the literature pertaining to hardened structures such as geotubes is that that with a major storm over time, major storms, that when the tide comes up, the ocean wants to migrate, but this prevents the migration, and therefore there's severe migration to the west of the hardened structures, which we've seen on Dune Road over time. So we're spending $1 billion on a project. My understanding would be that some of these hardened structures should be evaluated and the ones that are in jeopardy be removed so that we're not putting all this money into putting sand on the beach and then having it washed out.
Yeah, and when you say the structures on Dune Road, such as the groin field and that work, those certainly were evaluated when you're looking at the large groin structures. But I will say there was less of a look at some of the the smaller homeowner geotextile constructed project. But it's a good point. As I mentioned to Kevin McAllister, some of what we do have as part of this project, and I mentioned the context of the inlets, is that monitoring and adaptive management plan as well too. And I mean, one of the benefits of constructing a project out of sand is that it's very adaptable. So if there are situations that are observed in the future as far as erosion that's not expected, there is the possibility to make those changes or adjustments in the future as part of the project. But so really as part of this project, we will be doing continuous coastal monitoring to understand how the shoreline is changing and responding.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Andrew Cirencioni. I live on the beach, my house on the beach. Whether I agree or I disagree with FIM project, it's coming, but I'm more concerned with down the line, what's the long-term consequences of my responsibilities and the responsibilities of everyone in Quogue, as far as taxes. I know there's going to be future renourishments, and if we have coastal storms, there's a lot of questions. And when I'm signing the easements, it seems like I'm going into an agreement. I'm agreeing to whatever. I don't know what's going to happen down the line. So I'm sure you're going to be sending the agreements we have to sign, and I hope it's really detailed. I know you can't give us the amount that's going to cost in the future, but how is it going to be divided amongst people who live on the beach and all Quogue residents and forever, on and on and on? What am I signing? I don't know if you can answer any of that now at this point.
Well, Andrew, I'll give a try at the answer. The easement is different from the future cost, and the easement is to provide the federal government with the ability to put sand on the beach in the Quogue area. The cost of this initial phase, as I think we all know, is 100% borne by the government, federal government. The cost of the ongoing nourishment for the next 30 years, and every 4 or 5 years, depending upon need, based upon how our beach does, and there will be ongoing renourishments. And my understanding is that 50% of that cost is borne by the federal government, 50% is borne by the state, or borne locally, and that 50% is split 35% to the state and 15% to the local communities where the sand is being placed. We don't know what those costs are going to be, but my understanding is that those costs are not $1 billion for Quogue. The cost of the ongoing renourishment is much, much lower. It's not that it's non-existent, but if you amortize that cost over 30 years or over the 4 years between renourishments, it is a manageable cost. The trustees have discussed it. There has not been, we're talking about theoretical dollars, and we don't know the timeline, but my personal belief is that Quogue is a beach community, and the cost of maintaining a beach is a cost that should be borne by the village of Quogue and all of the residents. So don't foresee a situation, at least currently, in which we're going to be putting special assessments on the owners of property on Dune Road. I don't know what's going to happen in 30 years, Andrew. I'm not, I'm not pretending to be a seer into the future, but my belief, and based upon the information that the trustees have received to date, and this has been discussed, long before I got on the scene, is that cost is something that our existing budget can handle. It's not going to lead to massive increases in our taxes in the village, and whatever those costs are a cost that should be borne by all village residents. I don't know if that answers your question, because I don't have more information right now.
Yeah, I understand that the easements have nothing to do with the cost, but to me, signing an easement is opening the door. I'm getting involved in it. I'm not saying if I don't want to get involved, I'm not signing the easement. If you sign the easement, you are getting involved in whatever is going to happen down the line. So it's opening the door. Now, as far as the tax going to everyone, is that going to be like on a vote, or is that part of the budget, or how will that work out?
It's part of the budget, and which is the responsibility of the village trustees.
Right.
And we are subject to election by the residents of the village of Quogue. So,
right.
If you don't like what we do, vote us out.
Right.
I don't know what else to say. The budget is the local budget is within the trustees, and remember, that's only the local budget. There's also the town of Southampton budget, and there's the school budget, and there are lots of pieces.
Okay, well, just one last thought then. So when it comes down to that small amount that has to be paid, which we don't know, and it's going to be amongst everybody through the budget, is it going to be done equally, or will it be, like I live on the beach, will I be paying more than someone who lives?
It'll be based on property values, which is
property value,
which is the village of Quogue relies upon the town of Southampton's appraisals, and if your property on the beach is increased in value as a result of FIMP,
okay,
you'll pay more.
All right. Okay. All right. Let that answer. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Good afternoon, and thanks for convening this meeting. It's great to get a little more visibility on this. I had a question for the town and then a question for the Corps, and I'll start with the Corps. Oh, I'm sorry, Paul Hagan, resident of Quogue, and have a house here, many generations on the East End. For the Corps, I'm imagining this is one of the largest projects you've undertaken in terms of this type of nourishment. And I'm wondering if you can comment a little bit, and we heard a little bit about the dredging, just how this rolls across the landscape in terms of minimizing environmental impacts. I mean, it's a long stretch of shoreline, and so I imagine there's a timing involved where we're not doing every square foot of beach at the same time. But it'd be interesting to understand that. And then for the town, I mean, both Quogue and the town of Southampton have done a great job of, in my view, protecting some of the open space we have. Some of the building footprints I don't always like, but in terms of the bay acquisitions, we Suck Creek, we're doing neat things. But when I heard that we're touching 4,000 properties, but we're only looking at 14 structures being acquired, it felt like there might be an opportunity to dovetail with the town's CPF model to address homes that are at risk, properties that have potential to be part of the open space plan. So is there some nexus there? And if you could comment on that, that'd be great.
As far as the CPF, that's always an option. With our CPF program, we'll look at any options, any properties, and they'll be run by the CPF board and then also the town board supervisors here. We talk about every property that comes and look at the merit of it, and if it's something that's of interest from either from an environmental point of view or just a pure open space point of view, we'll commence an appraisal, and then we'll hopefully have a voluntary acquisition. So, but yeah, sure, we will look into how we could use the CPF as a tool in our toolbox on this whole project to see how we can address the flooding issues and the overall project, how that CPF can fit into the whole overall project. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Community Preservation Fund. It's the money that we get from a 2% transfer tax that's generated on all real estate transactions. Thank you. Yeah, right. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. We've been, you know, as the supervisor was saying, we're very aggressive. We've had a very successful CPF program. We're very proud of that, and we're purchasing with the support of the supervisor and the town board. We're purchasing properties every week, every month. Really, at this point, we're bringing in a tremendous amount of money, and we're also, you know, investing in that money into you know, preservation and open space.
Well, it's certainly appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah,
And then on the beach plan?
Yeah, you know, in terms of volume of sand, though, you know, we talk about this project being 83 miles long. As I mentioned, you know, we're not going to be placing sand along every stretch, you know, the entire stretch of those 83 miles. This project is comparable in size with many others in terms of beach fill volumes. We actually just finished placing over 7 million cubic yards of sand on the Fire Island barrier island under the Fire Island to Merchants Stabilization Project, which is basically an advanced part of this project being constructed post-Sandy. As many probably heard, we also did the work in downtown Montauk, which were post-Sandy stabilization projects that were originally part of the fimp plan. But you know, the environmental impact statement that Steve mentioned earlier, that we've mentioned a few times, took into consideration the construction operations, the placement of this material, and our completed projects that we have done at Fire Island, at Long Beach, along the New Jersey coast, have shown that the environmental impacts of these type of operations are minimal and temporary, and that there is restoration of natural processes, there is restoration of marine habitat. All that comes back fairly quickly after completion of construction. Is there some temporary disruption during construction operations? Absolutely. But you know, we are in compliance with the Endangered Species Act. We receive water quality certificates from the state of New York as issued by the DEC, so we're in compliance with all of the state environmental laws and regulations. All of that will remain in place, and we also do the post-construction monitoring, which not only looks at the performance of the project, of the beach conditions, and whether or not we need to come back and do renourishment in 4, 5, 6 years down the line, but we also do environmental monitoring to ensure that the minimal impacts that we had assumed during the planning phase actually come to fruition. And Steve mentioned adaptive management, and environmental impacts and environmental measures are part of that adaptive management. And you know, I guess one of the benefits of a soft solution like sand and dunes is that there are flexibility. You know, when you build a massive wall, though that may be the solution sometimes and the right answer for certain projects, it's harder, obviously, to modify what you've already built. You know, start tearing apart the stone wall or the sheet pile wall that's out there. But with sand placement projects, beach replacement projects, you do have more flexibility to make necessary adjustments, whether it's for a technical or engineering reason or even environmental reasons.
And just last question, can you share with us just the onshore construction window? Like, what's the window where things would be happening on the beach most of the time?
I mean, specifically talking about this contract, but in this project in general, I think you're going to see most of your activity between October and March.
Thank you.
And just one other point of clarification as far as the human impact of beach fill is the way the contractor works is they bring a pipe that comes onshore and then they work along the beach. But they tend to shut the beach in relatively small segments, whether it's a 500-foot or a 1,000-foot segment. So when if you're looking out at the beach and you're wondering, you know, what's the impact of me being able to get to the beach, it's usually the beach is shut on those relatively small segments as the contractor is working down the beach. So when Anthony says, you know, the contractor may be there from November through March, it's kind of like a roving blackout for some period of time, for that small segment of shoreline, usually on the order of, depending upon the construction equipment, they could be moving, a few thousand feet a day, right? Yeah. Yeah, so it could be a relatively short window of closure.
Hi, my name is Linda Confessori. Our home is on the canal side of Dune Road. First, I have thanks, then I'd like points of clarification, and then my question. So first, I'd like to thank former Mayor Peter Sartorius for his work extensively on this project, and I'd like to thank Mayor Truehold, who's been so receptive and has organized this informational meeting for the benefit of our residents. I think we're the only village to have asked for this. I want to buttress Connie's remarks on the bays. The only time we've been flooded in Sandy, which was Sandy, was from the bays, not the ocean. And I think that deserves further consideration. The hardened structures, as I understand it, are temporary permits, and no one seems to be monitoring them. And I'm wondering whose responsibility that is, because I do think they're detrimental. And it's not the big ones. We all know about the groins and the Shinnecock Inlet and so forth. But the hardened structures on individual homes that really affect their neighbors are not being monitored. Could you answer that question? Is someone? Okay, it's all right. You can tell me later.
I mean, I'll just say that it doesn't fall under our purview to monitor those individual structures.
Someone will answer me later. I'll write it in. And then I think for the audience, it should be clarified that the sand deposits are not blanketing the beach. You've selected areas, the worst areas that need it, and in many respects, the littoral drift will carry sand and benefit further down the beach. Is that correct? Because blanket is a bad term.
No, that is correct. It's just localized to where it is needed, and essentially the sand bypassing that's being implemented at the inlet is really intended to serve as that feeder to the downdraft shorelines to reduce the need for renourishment in the future.
Okay.
Yeah. In terms of the area that's covered by QUAG, I should have made this announcement earlier before many people had left, but Aram kindly blew up some maps that are in the back, which show the area. There are two different sets. There's on the north side, on the left as you're leaving, there's a map that shows the area that's covered by the Contract 3 as published on the Army Corps of Engineers website that runs approximately from the East Quogue line, the village line, up to the beach club.
I just think it's important for the audience to understand that. Past efforts, involved blanketing the whole beach, and that's why the term blanketing, raises hackles in some quarters. I think there's a disembodiment between federal funding and the word taxpayer, because that's where the federal funding comes from. From my reading, I'd like to know an uncomfortable question. What if the Army Corps of Engineers goes out of business before the end of this project? And what, for the 30-year extension, it's not funded?
Okay, so currently we do have the federal funds available until expended, as per the legislation that was passed in 2013. I cannot speak for Congress, but being that I've been doing this for nearly 30 years, I find it hard to believe that money will be moved away from a project that's already under construction. That's why it was so very important that the project partnership agreement was executed when it was last year. The way the Corps of Engineers has been managing the Sandy Recovery Program, not just here in our district, but along the Northeast region, is that once the legal cost-sharing agreement is in place with the non-federal sponsor, we're going to consider that project underway, and we have support, and we're moving out. Now, if we have the same conversation in 10 years, and there's still $1 billion left to spend on the project, you could have a different answer. But our goal here is to continue to aggressively execute and deliver this project. I mentioned contract 1 is well underway. We have another bid opening tomorrow. Hopefully this contract number 3 will get going. We have a contract 4, which is another beachfront placement and dune construction project in West Hampton. And we're excited to get the non-structural program underway in 2024. So your second part of your question is the remaining 30 years. We've already had some preliminary discussions with New York State. We are going to draft up a supplemental agreement or a new agreement for the remaining 30 years. That portion of the project will be subject to future appropriations, both on behalf of the federal government, the state of New York, and the locals. And can't make any promises or commitments for money in the future, but as money becomes available, we have the agreement in place. We will certainly put it to good use and for the renourishment and continuation of this project.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure. Let's try to wrap this up in the next few minutes because we've I thought this would be an hour. I was unrealistic, but
Hi, I am Robin Eshapour, 58 Dune Road, however, in the East Quogue area. I'm also a board member of the Tiana Beach Erosion Control District. So this project has been on our radar for quite some time, and we are excited to hear that Quogue, a portion of Quogue, is being included. So that's fantastic. And we look forward to working with you to get our 60-some-odd, the homeowners that are within our district. We look forward to getting the easement signed and to working with you. And this is an awesome, fantastic project. I'm very excited about it. Is there going to be an opportunity for specific property owners to discuss specific aspects that relate to their individual property? And if so, what channels would that go through?
Robin, if you mean, certainly the town will be available to, as we mentioned earlier, you can reach out to myself, Kelly Dole, who's in my office, Sean. You can contact us, have any questions about your specific properties, absolutely, from the town. We can coordinate. If you have questions about something the Army Corps is doing, you can try to contact them directly, or you can have a question to me. I can work with Matt, who's at the New York State DEC, or the folks from the Army Corps.
I'm going to have some specific dune alignment discussions that I would like to have, and that's personal, and I don't want to...
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. And the next question is, how does FEMA, do they adjust their flood maps based on these projects? Have they, historically, has this had any effect on how FEMA recognizes? How does FEMA recognize these projects?
FEMA recognizes these projects, but as designed, the FIMP project is unlikely to change your federal flood insurance requirements. So if you live on the Barrier Island, if you're in a V zone, you could potentially build a project that's large enough to take you out of the V zone into an A zone, but that size of a project is so big that it's much bigger than what we're constructing as part of FIMP. And I think I'll just leave it there because I know we're trying to move the schedule along, but if you have more questions, I could answer them specifically.
So when you say it's a larger project, it's not something an individual homeowner can say, you know what, I'll foot the bill for this larger project? Is that a possibility?
It is a possibility. What FEMA looks at is the volume of sand within the dune, and it requires either 540 or 1,080 cubic feet of sand within the dune. in front of your structure. And then, and then I think it requires a commitment that that's going to be made in perpetuity. So it's a pretty high lift in order to meet that requirement.
I'm very ambitious. I would like to know how this I happen to be in a VE zone.
Could we leave this to...
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I think that everybody's contact information is going to be made available to everybody, and everybody has clearly displayed that they're open to individual questions.
Cool. So thank you, and as I said, I'd like to leave off, but I'm very excited that Quag is part of this project. And the Tiana Beach Erosion Control District look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Connie Buckley, and I live on Dune Road in Quag. As a point of reference, what is West Hampton's success rate of dredging, which I understand has been going on for quite a while?
The West Hampton interim project that was constructed in 1996 has been a very successful example. You know, that is a project that was originally, you know, constructed and designed with the plan to be renourished every 4 years. In reality, it hasn't had to be renourished that often. It tended to average on every 5 or 6 years. But that is a project that has steadily received funding and has been renourished and is performing, you know, excellent. I mean, I will say one unique aspect of the Village of West Hampton Dunes project is that it was constructed as a result of a settlement, you know, between the federal government, you know, the state and the county, where we agreed to construct that project as compensation for the erosion caused by the West Hampton groin. So it is a unique situation, but it is a great success story.
Thank you.
One quick story. I know we're out of time, but this is important. 3 days after Hurricane Sandy, I had the opportunity to jump into a New York State police helicopter from Albany with Matt's predecessor at the time, Sue McCormick. We flew over the entire New York City, Long Island coastline, south and north shores. You can imagine the types of devastation we saw 3 days after Sandy. Fire Island, before our project and dunes were put in, just destroyed. Flew over the village of West Hampton and West Hampton Dunes. The two gentlemen, the two police officers, the pilots, when they looked down at West Hampton, they said, it doesn't look like the storm hit this area at all. Why is that? And we pointed out the dune system that was in place, that was constructed back in 1996 and has been renourished ever since. So that's just, you know, a great example of how successful that project has been for that particular community.
Susan Boyle again. I just have a very quick question. I was wondering if it's being explored. It seems like a great opportunity to minimize like the carbon footprint, the environmental impact with potentially electric vehicles, construction vehicles. I don't know if that's in the realm of possibility. It would minimize sound, minimize exhaust. And I know that that's being done in other areas in terms of construction vehicles.
No, that's a good question. As Anthony was mentioning, we have a number of environmental compliance requirements that we have to work through, and one of them is actually the clean air conformity. And so part of what we have looked at is the additional contribution of all this construction equipment to the air quality. And as part of this agreement, we are required to provide offsets to reduce the air quality, and it's something that we do on a year-to-year basis to make sure that the construction emissions are offset. And part of what we are embarking on now is a marine vessel electrification program. So it is something that's being looked at as far as opportunities to take, you know, it might not be using an electric dredge because those are very few and far between, but opportunities to overall reduce these emissions by converting some of these marine vehicles to electric or more or less polluting types of engines.
That's great. Yeah, I've just read about an example in Norway where all their you know, bulldozers, construction vehicles on land they're converting to electric. Thanks.
Can I thank you for the questions. I think we really taken advantage of our guests to the village, and I'd like to have a round of applause for the Army Corps. And I won't go through everybody's name again, but I really appreciate Jay, your being here, New York DEC, the town of Southampton. Everybody who's come to this project is coming with the good spirit of trying to make this a successful project for the village. The village is an active participant in this project, even though it's the town that's responsible for obtaining the easements. We are part of the process, both to facilitate in terms of trying to help answer questions, make this as smooth a process as possible. And I thank you all for coming today. Remember, the maps on the back are interesting if you have a chance. All of the information that's been provided today will be posted on the website. The presentation will be available. And thanks to Charles here, who's been actively helping with the tech and videotaping. The videotape will also be available with links and all. So thanks again. Have a great time and have a great last few days of summer.